He never went to military academy. He never studied strategy. He was a butcher by trade, a brawler by nature, and a political thug before he was ever a soldier. And yet Sepp Dietrich rose to command some of the most powerful armored forces in the entire German military, leading the personal bodyguard of Adolf Hitler from a ceremonial escort unit to one of the most feared divisions on the Eastern Front. He was present at the blood purge of 1934. He fought at Kharkov, at Normandy, at the Battle of the Bulge. He was decorated with the highest military honors Nazi Germany could bestow. And after the war, he was convicted of war crimes, twice, for massacres his men committed on 2 different continents, in 2 different phases of the same catastrophic conflict. But let's start at the beginning, because the beginning tells you almost everything about how Sepp Dietrich got to where he ended up. Joseph Dietrich was born on May 28, 1892, in Hawangen, a small village in Bavaria. His family was working class. His education was basic. When he finished school, he became an apprentice butcher, learning the trade in the towns of southern Germany and Austria. There was nothing in his early life that suggested military greatness, political significance, or historical infamy. He was a young Bavarian tradesman in the years before the First World War, and that's all. Then 1914 happened. Dietrich was conscripted into the German army and sent to the Western Front. And here, for the first time, something about him began to emerge. He was not a natural intellectual. He was not a planner or a strategist, but he was physically fearless, instinctively aggressive, and completely at home in the chaos and violence of close combat. He served in the artillery, then in early tank units, Germany's nascent armored forces in the final years of the war. He was decorated multiple times. He ended the war as a sergeant, which in the German army of World War I was no small thing. It meant you had survived 4 years of industrialized slaughter and been recognized for competence in the middle of it. When the war ended, Germany collapsed around him. The Kaiser abdicated. Revolution broke out in the streets. The Weimar Republic was born in chaos and humiliation. For men like Dietrich, veterans who had survived the trenches, who believed in German greatness, who had no particular skills that translated easily to civilian life, the post-war years were disorienting and bitter. He drifted. He worked various jobs. He joined the Freikorps, the paramilitary units that fought against communist uprisings in Germany and in the disputed borderlands to the east. He worked as a customs official, a tobacco salesman, a waiter, a petrol station attendant. He was restless, unsettled, and increasingly drawn toward the radical nationalist politics that were fermenting in Bavaria in the early 1920s. And in 1923, he joined the Nazi Party. The timing matters. 1923 was the year of Hitler's beer hall putsch, the failed coup attempt in Munich that landed Hitler in prison and almost destroyed the Nazi movement before it really started. Dietrich was not yet a significant figure, but he was present at the beginning, when membership meant something different than it would later. He was not a careerist jumping onto a winning bandwagon. He was a true believer joining a fringe movement that most of Germany regarded as a dangerous joke. He became a member of the SS, at that point still a small personal bodyguard unit for Hitler, subordinate to the SA and numbering only a few hundred men. And he attached himself to Hitler personally with a loyalty that was almost feudal in its character. Dietrich was not an ideologue in any sophisticated sense. He didn't write theoretical treatises on racial policy or Germanic destiny. What he had was personal devotion. To Hitler specifically, to the movement as Hitler embodied it, and to the idea of German military power as an end in itself. Hitler, in turn, trusted him completely. In 1931, Dietrich was given command of the SS Leibstandarte, Hitler's personal bodyguard formation. At that point, it was essentially a ceremonial unit, a small detachment of physically imposing SS men who provided security for the Führer at public appearances. Dietrich took it and began turning it into something more. The first test of what that something more meant came in June 1934. The Night of the Long Knives, or Operation Hummingbird, as it was officially called, was Hitler's violent purge of the SA leadership and various other political enemies. Ernst Röhm, the head of the SA, and dozens of other men were arrested and shot over the course of a weekend. It was murder, pure and simple, the execution of political rivals without trial, without due process, without any legal framework whatsoever. Dietrich's Leibstandarte participated directly. His men carried out some of the executions. Dietrich himself was present and active throughout. He did not hesitate, did not question, did not express any reservations about what was being done. He was the instrument of his Führer's will, and that was enough for him. The Night of the Long Knives told the world, or should have told the world, exactly what the SS was and what Sepp Dietrich was. It didn't. The event was explained away, rationalized, buried under official propaganda, and Dietrich was rewarded with promotions and honors. By the late 1930s, the Leibstandarte had grown from a bodyguard unit into a fully motorized regiment with thousands of men, its own artillery, its own support elements. When Germany went to war in 1939, Dietrich commanded it in Poland, then in France, then in the Balkans. The Leibstandarte fought in every major German campaign of the early war years, and Dietrich received credit for its performance, though historians have often noted that much of the actual operational planning was done by his staff officers, men with formal military educations that Dietrich himself lacked. His command style was not intellectual. He led from the front, which his men respected, and which produced genuine results in the fluid, fast-moving warfare of the early campaigns. He was personally brave to the point of recklessness. He communicated in the blunt, profane language of the common soldier, rather than the formal diction of the officer class. His men were loyal to him. Hitler adored him. But the early campaigns also produced the first documented atrocities. In May 1940, during the French campaign, soldiers of the Leibstandarte massacred approximately 80 British prisoners of war at Wormhout. The men had been captured in combat and were being held in a barn when SS troops threw grenades into the confined space and shot the survivors. It was a straightforward war crime, the murder of prisoners who had surrendered and were entitled to the protections of the laws of war. Dietrich was not personally present at Wormhout, but he commanded the unit. The culture of his formation, the contempt for conventional military ethics, the brutality toward enemies, the sense that the Leibstandarte operated by different rules than ordinary soldiers, was something he had built and cultivated. The massacre at Wormhout did not happen in spite of Dietrich's leadership. It happened because of it. Then came the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa launched in June 1941, and the Leibstandarte moved east as part of the massive German assault on the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front was qualitatively different from anything that had come before, not just in scale, but in its fundamental nature. This was not a war conducted under the laws of war. It was a war of annihilation, explicitly conceived by the Nazi leadership as a racial and ideological struggle in which the normal rules did not apply. Soviet commissars were to be shot on capture. Civilians in partisan areas were to be treated as combatants. The territory was to be systematically stripped of resources for German use. Dietrich's forces participated in all of this. On the Eastern Front, the Leibstandarte, which had by now expanded to divisional size and been redesignated as a Panzer Grenadier Division, fought in Ukraine, in the Rostov area, and in the brutal defensive battles as the German advance stalled and began to reverse. The Kharkov battles of 1943 became the centerpiece of Dietrich's military reputation. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, Soviet forces had pushed deep into Ukraine and recaptured Kharkov. The SS Panzer Corps, of which Dietrich's division was the core element, launched a counterattack that retook the city in brutal urban fighting. It was one of the few significant German offensive successes of the later war, and it demonstrated that the SS armored forces, whatever their other characteristics, were genuinely formidable in conventional military operations. Dietrich was decorated with the oak leaves with swords and diamonds to the Knight's Cross, one of the highest military decorations in Germany. He was celebrated as a hero. Hitler held him up as proof that loyalty and fighting spirit could compensate for any lack of formal military training. What was not celebrated was what happened in Kharkov alongside the fighting. As SS forces moved through the city, they participated in the killing of civilians, the execution of suspected partisans and Jews, and the general terror that characterized SS operations in the occupied Soviet Union. The military victory at Kharkov and the atrocities committed there were not separate events. They were aspects of the same operation, carried out by the same men under the same command. By 1944, Dietrich commanded the 1st SS Panzer Corps, a formation of enormous power built around the Leibstandarte and other elite SS divisions. When the Allies landed in Normandy in June 1944, his corps was among the forces committed to stopping them. The fighting in Normandy was ferocious. The bocage terrain channeled combat into close-range infantry engagements where German defenders had significant advantages, and the SS divisions fought with the fanatical intensity that characterized their operations throughout the war. And in Normandy, the atrocities continued. On June 7, 1944, one day after D-Day, soldiers of the 12th SS Panzer Division, which was operating alongside Dietrich's corps, massacred 156 Canadian prisoners of war at the Abbaye d'Ardennes. The men were shot in small groups over several days. The commander responsible, Kurt Meyer, was later convicted of war crimes. The broader pattern, SS forces killing prisoners rather than processing them through the proper channels, reflected the same culture that had produced Wormhout 4 years earlier. Dietrich's direct responsibility for the Normandy massacres was contested at his post-war trial. But he commanded the corps. He set the operational culture. He had spent 15 years building formations that operated this way. After Normandy, as German forces retreated across France and into Germany itself, Dietrich was given command of the 6th SS Panzer Army, the most powerful armored formation Germany could still field, and Hitler chose it as the instrument for his last major offensive gamble, the Ardennes offensive of December 1944, known in the West as the Battle of the Bulge. The plan was audacious to the point of delusion. Germany would punch through the thinly held American lines in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, capture Antwerp, and split the Allied armies, forcing a negotiated peace in the West that would allow Germany to turn its full remaining strength against the Soviets. It was the kind of strategic thinking that had worked in 1940. In December 1944, with the Wehrmacht a fraction of its former strength and Allied air power dominating whenever the weather cleared, it was fantasy. Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army was supposed to be the main effort, the armored fist that would drive through and reach the Meuse. It failed. American resistance was stiffer than expected. Logistics collapsed. The weather cleared and Allied aircraft destroyed German armor on the roads. The offensive ground to a halt and then reversed. But before it failed, it produced one more atrocity that would define Dietrich's post-war legacy forever. On December 17, 1944, near the Belgian town of Malmedy, soldiers of the 1st SS Panzer Division, part of Dietrich's army, shot approximately 84 American prisoners of war in a field. The men had been captured and were being held under guard when SS troops opened fire on them. Some survived by playing dead. The massacre was documented almost immediately, the news spreading through American forces and hardening resistance throughout the Ardennes. The Malmedy massacre became one of the most famous war crimes of the European theater. After the war, it became the centerpiece of the trial of Sepp Dietrich and dozens of his subordinates. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Dietrich was captured by American forces. He was 62 years old, decorated with Germany's highest honors, and responsible, directly or through his command, for atrocities on multiple fronts across a war that had lasted 6 years. The Malmedy trial, conducted by an American military tribunal in 1946, convicted Dietrich and sentenced him to life imprisonment. 73 of his subordinates were also convicted. 43 were sentenced to death. The trial became controversial almost immediately, not because of any doubt about whether the massacre had occurred, but because of allegations that American interrogators had used improper methods, including mock trials and physical coercion, to extract confessions. A Senate investigation under Joseph McCarthy examined the allegations. The controversy became entangled with Cold War politics. West Germany was now an American ally, and executing large numbers of German soldiers was politically inconvenient. The death sentences were commuted. Dietrich's sentence was reduced. He was released from American custody in 1955, serving less than a decade for crimes that included the murder of prisoners of war. He was not free for long. In 1956, a West German court convicted him for his role in the Night of the Long Knives, the 1934 murders he had participated in 22 years earlier. He was sentenced to 18 months and served it. He died in 1966 in Ludwigsburg, West Germany. He was 73 years old. Thousands of former SS veterans attended his funeral. So, what do you make of Sepp Dietrich? He was not an intellectual. He was not a strategist. He did not have the professional military education of a Manstein or a Guderian. What he had was personal bravery, genuine leadership presence, and an absolute loyalty to Adolf Hitler that never wavered from 1923 until the end of the war. Hitler trusted him precisely because Dietrich was not the kind of man who would think too much. question too much, or place his own judgment above his Führer's will. That loyalty made him useful. It also made him complicit in everything the regime did, from the political murders of 1934 to the war crimes of the French campaign, to the massacres on the Eastern Front, to Malmedy. He was never a reluctant participant. He was never a man who followed criminal orders while privately disapproving. He was a true believer in Hitler, in the SS, in the idea that his men were warriors operating above and beyond the constraints that governed ordinary soldiers. The military decorations were real. The battlefield performance at Kharkov was real. The courage was real. And the bodies, the British prisoners at Wormhout, the Canadians at Abbé Dardenne, the Americans at Malmedy, and the uncounted thousands on the Eastern Front, those were real too. A butcher from Bavaria who became Hitler's most trusted soldier. A man whose career began with a cleaver and ended with the highest medals Germany could award. And whose legacy is written not in the decorations, but in the fields where his men killed people who had already surrendered.